Hi there, TCC. Welcome to the video series for writing, reading, and research and transferable skills here for TCC. My name is Yasmin Chahal, and I teach in the Writing Studies program. Today, I'm joined by our lead tutor, Lindsay, from the Writing Center. So today, we're interviewing Professor Kayla Shaffron from chemistry, and we're really excited to have her here today. All right, so our first question for you, Kayla, is tell us a little bit about yourself. What is your favorite course to teach, and what is one fun fact about you?
Thank you. I'm excited to be here today. I teach chemistry courses, and my favorite is probably to teach 121. That is the chemistry for our allied health majors and pre-nursing and stuff like that. So it's really fun because I get students from, all different background knowledge on chemistry, different ages, different experience in the field and stuff like that. So it's a really cool mix, and that's why it's my favorite to teach. And then a fun fact about me is I have two cats, and my apartment is getting filled with more and more cat furniture the more time goes on.
Nice. Cats are great company.
They are.
All righty. So our next question is, for students taking a class in your discipline, what would you like them to know about writing, reading, research in your field? Does writing, reading, and research play a role in your teaching? And I'll put all these questions in the chat for you.
Yeah, so for students who are taking classes in chemistry, I think a lot of times it can be tempting to think that you're not going to need to write, or that the, skill of writing is not as important, but it's actually really very important, not only just in, chemistry, but in science in general. So it is important to be able to know how to clearly communicate your scientific findings. I think that's a really big part of science, doing good science. And that can look like, writing lab reports or writing, research papers, and also kind of making sure that you are staying up to date on current developments in the field. So that's, reading the current literature and making sure you know what's going on. That could be a really important part of guiding your research. So if you did go on to, do some research in chemistry or something like that, knowing what's going on in the field is integral to being able to ask good questions and figure out how to guide your research and stuff like that. So, I think all of those things are really important to the field of chemistry. And then, in my teaching, I try to kind of emphasize the importance of these skills. Mainly with lab reports, we do a lot of lab reports. So after every single lab experiment, we're going to write a lab report about it. And we sort of start small and kind of build those skills throughout the quarter. But yeah, analyzing your data after you do experiments is also a really important part. And then you've got to be able to write about it. So those are kind of the most common things that we do in my chemistry classes. But what I'd really like to do in the future is more small research projects, or critically analyzing some of these scientific articles and stuff like that.
That makes me so very happy to hear, because I always tell my STEM students, you have to be adaptable. There's always these emerging trends, new discoveries are being, happening all the time. So being able to, I really like that idea of having a research project on those articles and getting them, to be part of their community. I always say the discourse community, it's a club, right? So every community has that. So that's really nice to hear.
Yeah.
Not just that, but they will use that skill in allied health.
Right.
In nursing school, I'm pretty sure they have to do those types of reports, and they have to show that they can read things and understand them and report them.
Absolutely.
All right. So our next question is, what does effective writing, research, and comprehension look like in your field? So getting a little deeper there.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I had a professor once who said that science writing should be clear, concise, and precise. So he called it CCP, clear, concise, precise. And I think that really stuck with me. It's very different from writing. I mean, there's obviously a lot of overlap, but I think it's different from writing in, literature fields where you know, I think with scientific writing, the goal, the objective is to be very concise. And I've written a lot in the literature side of things too, so I've noticed that kind of dichotomy. But yeah, I think that that's the most important part is you want to make sure that your experimental procedures are very clearly laid out. I think the goal is always to make sure that someone can pick up your lab notebook or your report on your findings and redo your experiment. And that's part of good science, is being able to reproduce the results that you got from your experiment, right? So someone should be able to pick that up, be able to do the experiment like you did it, and it needs to be clear in that way. Also, I think, you know, using the American Chemical Society style guidelines is really important. I know every, you know, writing area, it's kind of confusing because we all have our different ways of our different guidelines and stuff like that, but we use that one usually. And I've also seen some other ones, but that's the most common, the ACS style guidelines. Yeah.
I like the acronym. So is it CCP, and what does it stand for one more time?
Yeah, CCP, clear, concise, precise. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to use that in class, and for the students that are listening, write that down too. And it sounds like it's all about, you know, it's basically like baking. If you can read the back of the box and, you know, have your 2 eggs, your butter, and, you know, you get to make those cookies that you really want. So
Exactly. I actually use baking as an analogy for my students all the time. Like, you wouldn't just give someone a recipe that just says, like, you know, I don't know, just very, you know, you want to be as precise as possible so that you can make
yeah,
those cookies really good.
yeah, you can, like, if you feel like having 2 dashes of the, no, you have to have this much,
Right.
or it's gonna get too salty or this or that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, I think the next question is from Lindsay.
Yes, this one is for tutors and students. What do you recommend to students who are struggling to understand writing, reading, and research in your field? Is there anything specific you want our tutors to know about your courses? And what can tutors do to help students feel confident navigating your courses?
That's a really good question. I think I'll answer the struggling with writing and reading and research and stuff like that first. So for writing, I would say, you know, practice often, write a bunch of stuff. And I think, like, writing as often as possible, even though sometimes it's hard and to get yourself to do that, because it's a little bit of a vulnerable process. You can be bad at it, right? Like, write a bad draft at first and get your ideas down on paper, and then get a bunch of feedback on that writing, right? Go to the Writing and Tutoring Center and ask for help. Talk to your professors and have them kind of look things over. Your peers are a great resource, you know. So being okay with your first draft not looking good is, I think, my biggest tip for writing specifically. Uh, as for what is the other, reading's a big one too. It's really important to kind of develop the skill of close reading, which means, you know, looking at what you're reading with more of a kind of magnifying glass, and really kind of paying attention, not going too fast, and being really detail oriented, I think, can be helpful. You know, what is this paper trying to say, right? I think that can be really helpful. And then as far as research in the field, I think the main thing is trying not to get overwhelmed. Research in science, there's so many different ways you could go. So starting with kind of a small research question can be really helpful, you know, maybe something that interests you. And I had another professor who said that, you know, research in science is like adding a drop of knowledge to a bucket of knowledge, right? So I think kind of keeping that in mind, like, okay, I'm going to pick this one thing to explore really deeply and then add to our wealth of knowledge on it, can be really helpful. So yeah. And then as far as, like, the second part, which tutors, how can tutors help students? I think a lot of students are going to find it really helpful to look over lab reports. And that's a skill that's not going to go away as you keep, you know, studying in science and pre-med and stuff like that. You're going to continually have to communicate your findings, and even just interpersonal communication is really important, you know, especially important in the nursing field and stuff like that. So, you know, empowering students to feel confident in their writing by looking it over and making sure that, you know, they're working on certain parts with you and yeah, supporting you.
It seems to me the other reason why it might be overwhelming is because that literature review will change every day. Like what's being added to the field, not only would you have to decide like what you're going to do, but you would also have to do it within the context of everything that the community is churning out as well.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it can get overwhelming. So I think it's, you know, important to remember you've got a lot of resources at your disposal. Just kind of take it step by step, ask a bunch of questions, start, you know, like being curious, I think is really important, and try to be more curious than you are scared. I think that's from a book I read. Anyways.
Good advice. So this next one is, what foundational skills would you like students to walk in with? What do you wish you had known when you had started writing, reading, and research in your field?
I think that it's helpful if you have some math, like basic algebra and math skills when you first start. There's a lot of like unit conversions, and you know, we walk you through working on that in the chemistry classes, you know, and kind of build those skills. But it is helpful to kind of have some knowledge on that, like coming in, especially with units, because we spend a lot of time talking about, you know, converting to metric system from, you know, imperial and stuff like that, or between metric units. And it's important as scientists to be able to communicate your findings to other scientists. And if you're using the same units to do that, it's a lot easier to, you know, look at your data and compare it, right? So that can be helpful, having those math skills, but it's also something that can be built. And then understanding, like a basic understanding of the scientific method, you know, forming a hypothesis, or a question first, then hypothesis, then, you know, conducting experiments to kind of explore that a little bit more, you know, analyzing your data, coming up with some conclusions, maybe redoing the process if you need to, right? Going back to the drawing board. So knowing a little bit about that can be helpful as well when you first start in the field. And then I think, you know, learning how to seek, you know, mentorship and stuff like that is a really big skill as well. That's helped me. I used to just, you know, think, okay, you're a scientist and you sit in a room and you ask these questions and you do your experiment, but it's not like that. Science isn't really done in a vacuum. We all work together and try to find answers. So I think that's an important thing to think about too.
I just thought everything you're saying is just so validating to hear. It's like you want, you know, students to be critical thinkers, to have research projects that they're interested in. And Lindsay had told me that you were a liberal arts tutor. Before I move on to my next question, I just wanted to hear more about that, you know, being a tutor in our centers, and now, you know, how did like that transfer of, you know, knowledge from liberal arts, then it goes to, you know, the sciences. I just want to learn a little bit more about that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I did. I started out tutoring at the Writing and Tutoring Center, and I was a literature or liberal arts tutor. And I always really loved reading and writing, and even creative writing, though I'm not as good at that. But I think it's really interesting because when I talk to other like chemistry teachers, I do find that they like writing as well. And I think there's something in that communicating these ideas that can be really like interesting and fun and challenging, but beautiful, you know? And I think I kind of like being in the middle where I can like enjoy the writing aspect and kind of like but also like doing experiments. And I think that those two really interact and in a nice way is kind of being able to look at science in context, not just I'm doing this experiment so that I can, you know, find out what's going on, you know, chemically or whatever. But I'm also able to apply that to the real world, you know, in ways that are meaningful and people find interesting and helpful.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, totally. It's just so cool to hear, because it's like you're using those skills now in a chemistry, you know, lens, and it's like showing how those worlds do have that connection and those transferable skills happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my next question is, how do you learn about or ask students to reflect on the prior knowledge your students bring to your course? How do you help students identify and describe the knowledge that they have learned in your course that might be relevant to other contexts, especially as they move through their academic pathways and into the workforce. I know that's a little long one, so I'm going to put that again in the chat as always. Yeah, I think you started already talking a little bit about workforce and moving through your pathway.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good question. I'll try my best to answer it. As far as my class goes, I think the reflection piece is something I'm really trying to get into class more and more as I keep teaching. I think reflecting first off, what I do in the beginning of the quarter is ask students to reflect on their experiences in science or chemistry, but sometimes they haven't taken chemistry yet. But just science in general and reflecting about, you know, what that's been like for them can be, I've found, monumental, because a lot of times it's unearthing these things, these fears that students have coming into chemistry, where they're like, oh my God, it's like a really scary subject. You know, how am I gonna, you know, pass this class, and then how am I going to get into the nursing program? And I think so that reflection piece can be really important, and sometimes it's kind of missing from a lot of science courses at the beginning of the quarter. And I think that can be really helpful. As far as reflecting on prior knowledge, I do ask students to try like a math review in the beginning of the quarter. And I think that can kind of help you gauge, you know, how much review do you need to do? And then you can ask for, you know, resources on that as well. Although that's not writing specific, but I think the reflection piece is important. As far as identifying, oh, we talked about that. Oh, and then moving into the workforce from academia, that can be like a little bit scary as well, I think, or it was for me at least. I was like, okay, I know how to school now, finally. How do I job a career, right? And I think that's where those interpersonal communication skills can come in, and learning how to you know, communicate your ideas effectively with other people is I think really important, and can't be overstated.
Thank you. All right. Our next question is from Lindsay.
Yes, this is the AI question. What is the role of AI in your classroom? How do you see students using AI effectively? And does your industry require that students learn to use AI tools?
Yeah, that's also a really good question. I think with the AI, it's so new. I think that I'm not totally sure where I see it fitting in yet. It's one of those things that I'm constantly thinking through. I know AI in industry is being kind of looked at in chemistry for specifically for data analysis and how useful it could be for that, especially when you're analyzing these really large data sets. So I think having a familiarity with AI is really important, and being able to, you know, learn how to get the answers that you're looking for from AI and use it as a tool. So I think it has a really growing, you know, role in all of our lives, but also science in particular, for that reason. For our class, I think it can be really useful for that first draft of writing. So if you're, you know, working on your lab report, and you know you have maybe like a, you know what you want to talk about, but you don't have a good outline, it could be really helpful to kind of like put in some of these like ideas that you have, and then it can kind of help you generate a little bit of a organized structure to your writing, and it can feel a little less daunting. And then what I'd like to do is have maybe students kind of analyze how AI is helpful and where it's useful, and then where it's kind of lacking, you know, and where it might not be useful. But I'm still kind of honestly in the brainstorming process for that.
I think most people are,
Yeah.
because it is kind of new. We don't know quite how it works. And we don't know all the problems yet, or
Yeah.
all the benefits. So
I have a friend of mine works in analytical chemistry at a lab for the government, and she said that they're not allowed to use AI yet, but that they had a whole meeting about it, about, you know, like, what do we use it for, and is it safe to use? And so I think it's a big question, but I do think using it as a tool and trying to start playing with it and learning how to use it and how it works can be really useful.
It's like making a new friend. You gotta see if you trust this person to, with all of your data, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so our last question is there anything that we didn't cover that you would like students to know? Any piece of advice for our students?
I think the main thing that I think people forget in is, or at least I did when I first came into science, was you're not doing this alone, right? You're working as a part of a whole group. Science is very collaborative. So being able to communicate with other scientists effectively, is like very, very important. It's not just you on your own investigating these questions, and that doesn't really lead to good science, right? To good experiments and stuff like that. So that's what I think one of the things that I really try to hammer home for my students is like working together can be amazing. It can be so beneficial for, science, and learning how to, work with other people is important.
All right, thank you so much. I'm gonna stop recording here before we let you go.
Okay.
All right.